Over to you.
Th- Thank you very much, Declan, and hello again, everybody. Great to get the opportunity to talk to you again. So we have a fair bit to cover off, so I'm gonna jump straight into it, but I'll give you just a summary as to what we're going to cover off over the next kind of 45 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the four long questions on the mock paper, give you an idea if those questions were to come up in the real exam, what we'd be looking for in terms of an answer. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm not going to cover off the multiple choice questions at all. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to email you the answers afterwards. Okay. So that way you have the answers to multiple choice ones, but we'd be all day if we were doing the multiple choice ones now. So I'm just going to focus on the longer questions. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go through those four. Then I'm going to put the mock exam away. I'm going to open up the real one. I'm going to be the only one that's going to be able to see it, I'm afraid. But I am going to open up the real one, and I'll give you some pointers and some indications as to what may be coming up in the real exam. Okay, so you won't have to cover off the entire law course. Although I will add a caveat to that: the multiple choice questions cover everything. Okay, so all four modules from beginning to end potentially appear in there. But for the longer questions, I will narrow it down a little bit, and there'll be some sections you can potentially leave out. Okay. All right. Okay. So the first of the four long questions is this one. Okay. So this is hopefully a chance to look at the mock one. So this is the question that we asked. Okay. Paddy in Dublin wrote to Mary in Cork offering to sell her his Mercedes car for €15,000. On receiving Paddy's offer, Mary telephoned him to say that she would like to accept the offer. But because there was such a large sum of money involved, and because there were one or two more interested parties, Paddy said he wanted Mary to confirm her acceptance in writing. He said if he received her acceptance the next day, which was Friday, he would go ahead with the sale at €15,000. Mary immediately wrote out her acceptance letter and posted it to Paddy in Dublin using Standard Post. Paddy received it the following morning, which was Friday at 11 a.m. On Thursday evening, however, Paddy had received a better offer from a local guy, and he wrote to Mary to withdraw his offer. This letter missed the last collection and was not received by Mary on Friday morning. Okay, discuss. All right. So the key thing that we're looking at, we will be more specific. It just says discuss there in the example, but we will be more specific in the real exam. But the key question that we're looking to cover off here, certainly at a starting point, is okay, is there a valid contract? Okay, Mary is likely to be unhappy at the fact that Paddy has now agreed to sell the car to somebody else. So the question is, okay, is there a legal contract or not? Okay, and there are four things that you need at its most basic for a contract to exist. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at these four things and then try to establish whether or not they are there. So the four things are offer, acceptance, consideration, and intention to create legal relations. Okay. Now is maybe a good time for me to say for the contract and the same for the tort question in the exam, and there will be a contract question and there will be a tort question, as there are in the mock one. There will be ones on the real one. There is not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Okay, you can argue either way. Okay, and you will probably actually score better if you do argue either way. You can come to a conclusion, and a conclusion is welcome. But what makes for an even better answer is said, okay, if the letter had arrived a day earlier, or if it had been sent a day earlier, or if another phone call had been made, or whatever it is, you can throw in some scenarios because this is what happens in real life in legal cases. Okay, the judge, when they're summing up, may well say, okay, if the person had done this or if the other person had done that, the outcome would have been different. Okay, so there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's probably good to kind of at least lean towards one answer or not. But there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, and you can argue either way. Okay, particularly for the contract and the tort ones. Okay. So that's just a quick sidebar. But going back to the actual case, is there an offer? Is there acceptance? Is there consideration? And are there intention for legal relations? So is there an offer, first of all? Okay, so it says, if we look back at the facts, it says Paddy writes to Mary in Cork offering to sell his Mercedes car. Okay, so he's put it in writing. There certainly appears to be an offer. Okay. Is there acceptance? Okay. On receiving Paddy's offer, Mary telephoned him to say that she would like to accept the offer. Is there an indication of an offer of acceptance there? Yes, there is. Okay. Then Paddy says, okay, there's a large sum of money involved. I'd like it confirmed in writing. So he adds an additional stipulation, and Mary complies with that when she writes the letter back to him. Okay. So is there an offer? Probably yes. Is there acceptance? Probably yes. Okay. Is there consideration? Okay, so consideration is important. Okay, if there's no consideration, then something's a present, and if it's a present or a gift, it's not legally enforceable. Okay, or less likely to be legally enforceable anyway. Okay, but in this one, there's talk of Mary sending Paddy €15,000 in exchange for the car. So is there consideration? Yes, there's a strong likelihood of consideration. And then finally, intention to create legal relations. Okay. There are letters flying back and forth. Okay. So Paddy's writing to Mary saying, would you like to buy my car? Mary telephones him, but then also writes a letter back saying, yes, I would like to buy your car. So there's letters flying back and forth, which is, confirmation in writing. Does that suggest a likely intention to create legal relations? Yes, it probably does. Okay. So the first four criteria, those are the four things you're going to talk about. If you kind of put a gun to my head now and said, okay, well, is there a contract or not? My thinking would be yes, there probably is. Okay. There are, however, other things you need to kind of talk about as part of your answer as well. But this is very important. So definitely get those first, as you're starting your answer, get those first 4 points down. Okay. Is there offer? Is there acceptance? Is there consideration? And is there intention to create legal relations? And why? Okay. Refer back to the case and say, I think there is evidence of it because of this, this, and this. Okay. These are mentioned. And if there's something that's not mentioned, like for instance, one thing that's not mentioned is their age. Okay. But we're talking about cars, so it's a fairly safe assumption they're both over 18. One thing is not mentioned that you can say it's not meant this the age is not mentioned, but I assume, as I've just said, that they are over 18 because of this. Okay, if you feel it's relevant to the answer. Okay. So a couple of other things we should be talking about in our answer. Distinguish between an invitation to treat and an offer. Okay, a unilateral offer. Okay, so this is not Paddy putting an ad in the newspaper. Okay, so Paddy's duties to Mary, if he puts an ad in the newspaper saying, come one, come all, and buy my car, they're much less than if Paddy specifically goes to Mary and says, "Would you, Mary, like to buy my car?" Okay, so it is worth discussing the difference between an invitation to treat and a unilateral offer. Okay, there is strong indication it's a unilateral offer. There's no mention of him advertising it in the newspaper. Okay, now you may ask the question, how did the other guy who comes up in the later part of the facts, how did he come to be aware that there was a car for sale? So that's where the gray area comes in, and you can discuss it. Okay. The postal rule is important to mention. Okay, the postal rule says, if we're talking about acceptance or withdrawing of an offer, the postal rule kicks in, the acceptance kicks in when the letter hits the post box. Okay, it's not when the postman collects it, it's not when the letter gets delivered, it's when the letter hits the post box. Okay. So that is your deal. Something is accepted or withdrawn, depending on the facts, when the letter hits the post box. Okay, so you could then have a discussion about, okay, well, listen, there was talk of Paddy withdrawing the offer. What hit the post box first? In my opinion, it's not clear entirely which is which. So in that case, you'd be well to say, okay, if the letter hits first, if the acceptance letter hits first, then it's accepted and they need to go ahead with the contract. If the withdrawal letter were to hit the post box first, then Paddy be entitled to withdraw it because Mary hadn't fully completed the steps that he asked her to do in terms of acceptance. Okay, so you can kind of see where the grayness kind of comes in. Okay, and the more you can discuss in terms of the grayness as part of your answer, the better. Okay. Other couple of things to maybe keep in mind. Okay, is there evidence of big lapses of time? Not really, because I think we're talking at a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I think all the events take place over a 2 or 3 day period. And a key thing, and sorry, I should have said this a bit earlier, a key thing is to refer to similar cases. Okay, so there are cases called out in the notes. Your opinion is one thing, and it's certainly valid. But an even much stronger thing legally is, okay, this reminds me of that case. This is what happened in that case, and therefore, based on that, I think Paddy will be successful, or based on the case, I think Mary will be successful. Okay. And then the final thing that you would be wise to maybe include would be the remedies. Okay. Let's say the court says, yeah, I see it as being a contract. Now, what do we do next? Okay. Are we talking about damages? Are we talking about specific performance? Are we talking about injunctions? What are we talking about in terms of a way of solving this particular problem? Okay. So those are the types of things we're looking for in question one. Are there any questions on that? No? Okay, very good. All right. So we'll move on to question two. There we go. I'll eventually get to it. Okay, so question two comes from module two, and it's on company law. Um, and the facts of the case are these. Okay, so Murphy Limited has indicated in their company constitution that they will renovate houses and apartments and sell them at a market price. For 5 years, they continued this undertaking, but then, following a review of costs and recent sales across the country, they determined that there is significantly more money to be generated by purchasing land and developing it. Without undertaking any changes to the company constitution, they embark on this new venture, borrow a significant amount of money from Loan Bank, and purchase their first plot of land. Okay, so there's three parts to the question. The question says, outline the possible consequences of this action for Murphy Limited, describe how these limitations have been relaxed over time, and what steps Murphy Limited can take to avoid this problem. Okay, so it's a three-part answer, and I think certainly within two of those three parts, there is three subsections to the answer. Okay, so first part of the question is outline possible consequences for this action for Murphy Limited. So the first potential consequence is the transaction may be void. Okay, so the bank has loaned money. Murphy Bank has taken the money and says, right, we have money. Let's start embarking on our purchasing and building. They buy a plot of land, as was said in the facts. They may then start building on it. What happens? Okay, so the transaction may be void. Okay, so what you could have is a scenario where somebody steps in and brings this to the court's attention, says, hang on, this is not in the company constitution and therefore cannot be done. So I suppose the likely whistleblowers could be kind of maybe other investors in the company who say this is madness. The company should not be going in this direction. Depending on the size of the company and whether it's a slow news day, you could have a journalist who maybe kind of blows the cover on this. But somebody somewhere will probably say, okay, this is, we've checked the company constitution. There's no mention of the company embarking on this sort of venture. We see it as risky, and therefore we're bringing it to the attention. So the transaction could be set aside and be declared void, in which case, the bank should get their money back. Murphy Limited should potentially, if they started building, they should maybe knock down what they built, and they should return the land to as close as possible to the way it was beforehand. So the transaction may be void. Okay, now how easy or difficult that is going to be to do depends on how quickly the whistle gets blown. But that's one potential consequence. Okay. The second potential consequence is that that Loan Bank could enforce a detrimental contract. So let's imagine a scenario, and this is all stuff you can discuss as part of your answer. Let's imagine a scenario where Murphy Limited embarks on this venture and it's a disaster. Okay, so oh my God, why do we ever go down this particular route? Okay, they said, hang on a sec, we have a way out of this. Okay, Loan Bank lent us the money. We're now due to start the repayments. Let's not repay Loan Bank, in which case we get ourselves out of the problem. Okay, and that's in theory something that they could do. And Loan Bank then go to court and say, okay, we should get paid because we lent money to Murphy Limited, and Murphy Limited should be paying us back. Okay, so Loan Bank could enforce a detrimental contract. So they could go to court, and the court could have a look at it and say, well, yeah, we feel that Murphy Limited should be paying it back, the money back. The defense that Murphy Limited may put up is they may say, well, this is not something that's in our constitution. Part of Loan Bank's responsibilities were to check our constitution, and they didn't do it. Okay, so that's a defense that Murphy Limited could put back. But the second potential consequence is that Loan Bank tried to enforce the detrimental contract, and Murphy Limited really regret embarking on this venture in the first place and are trying to wriggle out of it. Okay. And then the third potential outcome could be the directors of Murphy Limited could be subject to injunctions restraining them from making ultra vires transactions. So you might get to the stage of the discussions where a loan bank is saying, terrific, yeah, we're happy to loan whatever amount of money it is you need. Murphy Limited said, terrific, we're looking forward to purchasing land, and we're going to start building on it. We're all going to make loads of money and everybody's going to be happy. And then somebody could step in, like I said, potentially an investor or maybe another creditor, maybe of the company. They could, who may be a significant one, and might say, God, if they start going down this road, they're never going to have any money to pay us. Somebody could step in, but somebody could step in, and the directors could be subject to an injunction that says, no, you can't do it because your company constitution says that you are, renovating houses, and now you're going off and buying property and developing it, which is something completely different. Okay, so that's the third potential thing that could happen. Okay. So that's a third of the question kind of covered off. There's two other bits to it, which I'll cover off in a minute, but I'll just pause there for a moment. Is there any questions on what I've said so far? No, lovely. Okay. So the second part of the question was, well, talk about the relaxations that may have come into play. So the relaxation that came into play a little bit over 10 years ago in the 2014 Companies Act is saying, I mean, it used to be very restrictive for companies to change anything that they're doing. Okay, so they would have in their constitution, they would have listed well, sorry, predated the Constitution, but they would have listed the activities that they would be doing, and they'd be bound by them. Okay, and business moves faster, is moving faster and faster and faster, and companies, if they're going to keep up, need to be more and more agile. So some relaxations were brought in a little bit over 10 years ago, which said, okay, you're going to have a company constitution rather than an objects clause, which is what they had previously. And you can also put into your constitution that kind of says something more general that kind of says, I mean, previously things would have been very specific and said, okay, we are going to be embarking in these four ventures, and that's the only type of business we're going to involve in. But you could potentially now put into your company constitution something that says, okay, the directors are entitled to embark on any venture that they see as being profitable for the business. And they might also say the directors have within their power to borrow money that they feel it could be invested to make the company more profitable. More general clauses have been brought in and put into the company constitution, or can and have and will be put into the company constitution than there would have been prior to the 2014 Companies Act, where things would have been a bit more restrictive, and you would have said, okay, these are the four things that our company are going to do, and that's all we're going to do. Okay. Now, the last part of the question was, okay, well, what sort of defenses could Murphy Limited put up? Now, we touched on this in the first part of the question. But one thing they could potentially do is, first of all, they could be empowered to change the direction of the company. Okay, so the best way for the company to remain intra vires and within the rules is for them to detail in the Constitution something along the lines of what I've just said, that they can carry on any trade that, in their opinion, will be advantageous to the company, that they can borrow money for anything they feel is advantageous to the company. So yeah, directors can put that in to it. Now, putting it in retrospectively is maybe not quite straightforward, but one thing they could do is to change the constitution and put that in. Okay. Another option would be to prove that Loan Bank knew it was ultra vires. Okay, so if we take the scenario where the venture is a disaster, and Loan Bank want the money back, and Murphy Limited would love to get out of paying that money back, Murphy Limited could use the defence and say, well, it's part of their job to see if it's in the Constitution. They checked the Constitution, they saw it wasn't there. But yet they proceeded anyway, and they gave us the money. It's Loan Bank's problem, so that potentially is a defence that they could use. Okay, um, and then finally, a final action might be, and this would be a little bit of a more far-fetched one, but they could potentially show that the activity was not legal in the first place. Okay, so if whatever it is that Murphy Limited were embarking on for whatever reason was not legal, and they couldn't do it, if that was shown, then the court might potentially put the transaction aside and say, right, money is to go back to Loan Bank, Murphy Limited, or to give back the property, put it back in the state that it's in, and everybody walks away. Probably with a little bit of a red face and maybe a little bit poorer as a result. But the court could potentially argue that if the activity they were going to embark on was not legal in the first place. A bit more of a stretch than the first two, but potentially an option. Okay. So that's the type of stuff we'd be looking for if question two, or a version of question two, were to come up. Any questions on that? Okay, so we'll move on to question three, which comes from module three. And module three is primarily, there's a couple of other things in there, but it's primarily on EU law. Okay. And the question, if I remember correctly, so the actual real question in the real exam is indeed on EU law. So the question is reasonably short one. Question is, the Commission wants to cut greenhouse gas emissions across the European Union. They settle on a figure of 33% over a 10-year period. Describe how this proposal would progress through the EU institutions to become binding on the member states. Okay, so there's a couple of steps in relation to this. The first one is the consultative step. All right. So the Commission's the first player. They kind of say, okay, this is the general one. One of their roles is they would drive the general strategic direction of the European Union. So they would say, right, we want the cleaner air across the European Union. and we're going to give states deadlines to bring this into force. Okay, so they would set out. They're the first player. They initiate the policy and they say this is what we want to do, and they do it by submitting proposals to the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. This is what we're looking to do. You guys work together and make this a reality. Okay. The Commission will take into account the interests of various member states. Okay, so if, for argument's sake, let's say agriculture is playing a big part in terms of the emissions, and agriculture is maybe twice the percentage of a particular country's economy than it is with everybody else, that country is going to be potentially more severely impacted by a demand to cut greenhouse gases than maybe there are others. So they will take that in consideration, but at the same time, they will be looking for this to be implemented. So the next thing they will do after that is they will have a look and see, okay, well, what groups are going to be impacted if we put a requirement in place for the member states to have a 33% reduction in greenhouse gases. So what they will do is they will consult with various groups across Europe. Okay, so one type of business that they might consult with is they will consult with large industrial enterprises. Okay, so maybe the types of factories that might be emitting an awful lot of smoke into the atmosphere. They will consult with them and say, okay, we want to do this. How can we make this work? They will talk to energy groups, okay, say, right, how can we make our energy cleaner? They will talk to farming organizations, okay? And they'll probably also talk to people involved in transport for two reasons. One, if you're going to reduce greenhouse gases, you may want to reduce the number of cars on the road. So they will talk to people on the kind of motoring side of things, but then they will also talk to people on the public transport side of things, because if you're going to take the cars off the road, you need alternative ways of people getting from A to B in a reasonably efficient and cheap manner. They will also talk to public transport groups, okay? Following the various meetings, the Commission assesses the impact of what they're proposing, and the actions that the Commission recommends undertaking to resolve them. Okay, so the consultative bit is the first bit. Okay. Once the proposal from the Commission is finalised, it's going to be sent to the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers for review, to review the proposal and propose amendments. Okay, so that's similar to. It's discussed in Module 1. It's similar to the Doyle Committee reviewing a proposal from a minister, where you have a Doyle Committee who works on something. So the Parliament and the Council of Ministers are the two groups who are going to work on something to work out the nitty-gritty of this particular proposal. Okay. If the Council and the Parliament cannot agree upon amendments, a second reading of the bill takes place. During the second reading, both groups can suggest amendments, okay, which may allow for it to go through. If they cannot agree again, they will put together a conciliation committee with an equal number of representatives from the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament, okay, and they will work together to try to find a solution, okay? So the second stage is what is known as the review stage, okay? And then finally, you have the adoption stage. Okay, so the parliamentary committee votes on the report, possibly amends it. When the text has been revised and voted upon, the Parliament is deemed to have adopted its position. The process is then repeated one or more times, depending on the type of procedure and whether or not agreement is reached within the Council of Ministers. Council of Ministers represent their individual governments. The parliamentarians, all 700 odd of them, they are working to represent their constituents. Okay, so the focus is maybe a little bit different. Okay, but then the final stage is the adoption stage. Okay, so tricky enough one that there's an easier question on the main exam. Okay, you'll be pleased to hear. But that is what the type of stuff we'd be looking for if you chose to answer question 3 in the main exam. Are there any questions on that? Okay, lovely. And then finally we come to question 4, okay, which is tort. Okay, there will be a question on tort in the real exam. The only thing that really changes is the facts. The type of stuff we're looking for is fairly similar, although there's actually 4 parts in the mock exam. There's 4 parts to this question. It's actually condensed down into 2 in the real exam. Okay. But the facts on the mock exam are this, okay? So Declan is a young teenager who's being bullied by another young boy, Rod, in his class in school. Rod has been taking Declan's lunch money, threatening to beat him up if he tells anyone, and for months, Rod has been making Declan's life a living hell. Walking home from school one day, Declan notices that a local farmer, Tom Brown, has left the gates to his field open. Being naturally curious, he wanders in. The field contains a large barn, and it too is unlocked, so Declan wanders in there to have a nose around. He searches through some presses and finds a shotgun. The farmer has a license for the shotgun and is a member of the local game-keeping club, a fact that is well known in the community. The gun is empty, but after a more thorough search of the barn, Declan finds some shells. He hides the guns and shells in a school bag and heads home. Following day, Declan arrives in school, sees Rod playing in the yard, takes out the shotgun, which he's already loaded, turns it on Rod, and shoots him, causing serious injury. Declan has suffered an injury himself because of the kickback from the shotgun. Rod's parents want to bring a negligence action against Tom Brown because they believe that any person who owns a gun should be legally responsible for the injuries caused by that gun. Okay? So there's four parts to the quest. There's four individual questions in relation to that set of facts. Okay, first one fairly obvious, and it's not dissimilar to. We'll go into a little bit more detail the subcategories in part C of the question, but part A essentially is okay. Well, to prove a successful negligent action, what does Rod's parents require? What are Rod's parents required to do? So there's a number of things you can discuss here, but again, similar to contract law, the four basics are: what do you need to prove negligence? You need a duty of care. You need a breach of the duty, you need damage, and you need a link between the two. Okay, there needs to be a link between the damage and the breach of the duty of care. Okay, so those are the four things. Four things needed in contract law, four more things needed when trying to prove negligence. Okay, so you need those four. Okay. So if we talk about the four individually, so the duty of care, okay. So the thing is, we're talking about guns here, okay. We're not talking about something that maybe when used correctly, is extremely safe. Guns are only used in one way, and that is to inflict damage on somebody. So the duty of care in relation to guns is probably going to be very high. Okay, so is there a duty of care if you own a gun and you own the bullets? Yes, it's probably. Again, we're back into the gray areas that we had earlier. Okay, so you can argue either way, but a duty of care is probably going to exist in the case of a gun, and there is a similar case. What is it? It's Sullivan versus Creed. Okay, so there is a case in the notes that you can use to rely upon for a previous example as to what happened when similar facts, they're not the same, but when similar facts were introduced. Okay, so duty of care in relation to guns, yeah, probably quite high. Was there a breach of the duty? Okay, we talk a little bit more detail about that in part C of the question, but because we'll go into the individual sections of it. But was there a breach of the duty of care? You could argue there is, or you could potentially argue there isn't. Okay, so the gun was not locked. I mean, in a kind of real life, in terms of kind of criminal law side of things, the requirements in terms of guns have to be in a gun safe. The gun safe has to be kind of nailed to the floor, so it can't be lifted out and taken away. So the requirements are fairly strict. Okay, was it a case of these type of things? I mean, the only thing you would say maybe in Tom Brown's favor is that the gun was not loaded, and you didn't have the bullets right next to it. Declan had to go and look for the two. But other than that, he's probably on fairly shaky ground because it was not. It was hidden away. I suppose you could argue that one as well, but it was certainly not in a gun safe where the gun safe was locked around. It was in a barn. Okay. So, is there a breach of duty of care? You could argue that, and that's where you begin to bring in the discussion of, well, what would a reasonable person do? Okay, is it reasonable that a person would have the gun in the barn, or should all reasonable people have them safely locked away as per the law? Okay. Is there damage? Not an awful lot to discuss there. There is damage. Rod has been shot. Okay, so he is injured. So there is damage there. Declan has more minor injuries because of the kickback from the gun. So is there damage there? Yes, there is. Okay. And is there a causal link between the two? Yes, there probably you probably be leaning towards there is. Now is there a link between the breach of duty and there is. You could probably argue it either way. Now, one thing you probably are going to struggle to argue with is the link between Rod's bullying and the damage. I mean, you could potentially say, okay, because one of the defenses in tort is, okay, well, is there contributory negligence? Did the person do something that maybe contributed to the fact that they're now injured? Probably very hard to prove a link between, because the likelihood of somebody bullying then getting shot in Ireland is pretty low. Okay. Because we're not high in terms of gun ownership. Okay. But so the link there probably fairly tenuous. Is there a link between what Tom Brown did or failed to do and Declan doing it. You could probably argue it either way. I'd probably lean slightly towards yes, but you could argue either way. So again, as you can see, the grayness is there, so you can argue you want to refer to previous cases, and you can also put together an argument as to why you feel it's one or the other. Okay, but that's the type of stuff we're looking for in part A. Okay. Will Tom Brown have the defence have contributed negligence because Rob bullied Declan? Sorry, just cover that off actually a little bit ahead of time. In my opinion, no, because the likelihood of being able to successfully link what Rod did to what actually eventually happened to Rod is pretty low. The chances of that happening are very slim. Okay, so you're going to have a hard job trying to convince a jury or a judge that there's a link between the two. Rod's parents believe that Tom Brown was negligent because he, one, left the gates open, two, because he left the shotgun in an unlocked barn, and three, because Declan was able to find the shells in the barn. For each of these allegations, determine if there's an actual causation. So if we just take them one at a time, the gate being open, gates being open in, I do live in Dublin, but gates being open in more rural parts of the country where you can access fields, pretty common. Okay, a lot of gates around the country that have access to fields, they are unlocked. You can get in. Okay, and people being curious, kids being curious, and so on, can potentially end up in the fields. Okay, so are you negligent because you left the gate open? If there's not something inadvertently, if it's full of bulls or some of that, then yeah, you could certainly argue there. But are you negligent by just having the gate open alone? Probably not. Okay. However, within the field, there is also an unlocked barn. Okay. And within that unlocked barn, there is the gun. Okay. So the fact that you have open gate, then an unlocked barn, then a gun, then the bullets. Okay. Now you're beginning to kind of, the defense is looking a bit, or your opportunity to argue your way out of it if you're Tom Brown is looking a lot shakier. Okay. So I mean, in terms of the gates on its own, no, not really. The unlocked barn, if it didn't contain a gun, or if it wasn't full of dangerous things, again, you probably say, well, no, there's no real issue with the gun being, the barn being unlocked. The fact that there now is a gun in it means that the fact that the gun, so you're getting into the but-for test, but for the barn being unlocked and but for the gate being unlocked, Declan wouldn't have been able to do it. You're getting into the but-for test in terms of trying to prove your argument on either on the defense or on the side of the plaintiff. Okay. And finally, the last part of the question is, can Declan maintain a cause of action against Tom for his injury? The answer to that, pretty almost 100% certainty, would be yes. Okay. Because of one particular reason, which is that Declan is a minor. So there is, where is it now? Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. There is the Age of Majority, and it's gone off my screen. The Age of Majority Act of 1985. Declan is a minor and is therefore protected in law from harm caused by the carelessness of any adult. So much harder. So he's going to have a much harder job. So again, this is the type of point you could bring in and say, if Declan was over 18, then much harder for him to claim against Tom Brown. But because he is under 18, which is the fact that is essentially, it doesn't specifically say his date of birth or anything like that, but you can kind of assume, unless he's well into 60 year, that he is under 18. The chances of him being able to claim against Tom Brown for an injury that he himself inflicted on himself is actually quite high. Because again, when you take into account all the other points that we've made, there is a strong possibility of negligence on the farmer's part. So all of this is stuff that you can discuss throughout it. And the more you discuss and the better argument you put together, and the more you can tie it into either statute, which is the acts, or previous case law, which are mentioned in the notes, the stronger answer you're going to give and the better your score is likely to be. So that's the type of stuff we're looking for. A lot in there. Now, there's 4 individual questions. There's only 2 in the main one. And I'll actually essentially give you the questions in a minute. What I won't give you is the facts. Okay. So you won't have the facts of the case, but you will have the questions. So you'll know the type of stuff to look out for when you do get the facts on the day. But before I move on to the real exam, are there any questions on that?
Hi, Paul. I'm just wondering, what sort of word count are you looking for each answer?
Yeah, it's a good question. So let me see. So you need to do 2 questions, okay? And you will have an hour. So you have 30 minutes to do both, which is reasonably good. I'd certainly be looking for. I'd say the better answers that I've seen over the years are probably you're probably up to 2 pages anyway, and maybe in some cases a small bit more. Okay. So I mean, the absolute minimum. I mean, if you're only submitting maybe 3/4 of a page, you probably haven't. It's unlikely you've answered the question in enough detail. Okay. So you'd want a absolute minimum of a page, and I think for the stronger answers, I'd probably be veering more towards 2 pages. I've seen some that have gone on maybe a little bit more than that and into 2 pages. And pretty good chance if they're on the right track, which they usually are if they've written that much, they're probably heading for a very high score. Any other questions before I get on to the real paper, which is
Sorry,
yeah,
is it
sure.
2 pages per question or 2 pages
Per
for
per
two
per
questions?
per question, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Now that'd be kind of veering towards the max. I mean, I wouldn't normally see much more than that, but I think to really flush out the questions, you definitely need at least a page, and I'd probably even say at 1 page it might still be a little too short, but definitely if you get into the second page and if you're heading towards the end of the second page, as long as you're being succinct and you're not repeating yourself over and over again, you're probably heading for the right type of result that you're looking for. Okay. Um, so in terms of the real exam, so first of all, the structure of it. So it's the same structure as the mock. So you're going to have 50 multiple choice questions, and as I said, I'll fire on the answers to that once we've wrapped up this session. So you're going to have 50 multiple choice questions, and you've got an hour to get through those, and they are ultimately worth 40 marks. Okay. All right. So you got 40 points going a begging for the 50 multiple choice questions. Okay, and they can be anywhere from module 1 to module 4, beginning to the end. Okay, so to do well in those, you'd want to have a good working knowledge of modules 1, 2, 3, and 4, beginning to end. Okay, and you will need to prepare a bit in advance because finding the answers to those questions on the day is going to be tricky. Okay, but there are 40 points available for 50 multiple choice questions. Okay. Then in the second hour, you have 2 longer questions to do. There are 30 points available for each of them. Okay. That'll bring you to a total of 100. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to convert that score that you get out of 100. We're going to convert it back to a score of 70. Okay. So if you got half the marks, you're going to get 35 out of 70. Then we will add back in your score from assignment 1. Okay, which is a max of 10 more marks. So that could bring you up to maybe say 45. Then another 10 potential 10 marks for the second assignment. So that could get you up to 55. And then we will finally add in the average of your scores from the 4 short tests. Okay. So that's worth potentially another 10 marks. So that's giving you a total score out of 100. Okay. All right. So in terms of the longer questions, first question, not surprisingly, is on contract law. Okay. Actually, if you just bear with me a minute, because we do have a little bit of time left. If you do bear with me a minute, I'll just see if I can just open up the facts on the real exam. That's the real one. Yeah, I do have the real one. So, I mean, okay, so I won't share the facts, but I will share just quickly the questions. I mean, the first question we have for question 1 is, has a contract been formed? And if so, is it valid and legally binding? Explain your answer. And then the second part of the question on contract law is, what remedy or remedies might be available to one of the parties? Okay. So the first part of the question is, has a contract been formed? And if so, is it valid and legally binding? And explain your answer. And the second bit is, okay, let's assume there is a contract and somebody is not happy. What remedy might be available to the injured party? That's the question. I won't share the facts with you, I'm afraid, until the day itself, but that's the question, and that's the type of thing we're looking for. Okay. So again, you'd be going through your offer, your acceptance, your consideration, your legal relations, and relating it back to the case. Okay. The second question, it comes from company law. Okay. And I'm going to be very, very nice to you. Okay. So I'm going to limit it down. There's a lot of stuff in company law. I'm going to limit it down a lot. It's on company law and it's to do with the Consumer Credit Act. Okay. So that's one of the acts that is talked about in the second module. It is the Consumer Credit Act. So it's company law, it's the Consumer Credit Act, and that is question 2. Okay. Question 3, as I said earlier, is on EU law. Okay, so that comes from module 3. And it's the early part of the EU law section. Okay. So focus on some of the first few pages, I suppose, of the European law module. Okay. The first 3, 4, 5 pages of that. And that should cover off what you need for your answer. Okay. And then question 4, not too surprisingly, is on tort, which is module 4. So same types of questions, but different facts. Okay, so it's basically asking 2 things. So it's 4 in the mock, but there's only 2 in the main one. First question, quite simply, is there negligence? Okay, so on the contract law question, we're asking you, is there a contract? In the tort one, we're asking, okay, what do you think? Is there negligence or not? Like I said, you don't need to, I would lean towards one or the other. Okay, yes, yes or no, but you can keep it open and keep it gray and say, okay, if the person had, I don't know, slammed on the brakes, not caused the accident, then this would have happened. If the person had taken a little bit of due care and just done this small thing, then they wouldn't be eligible for negligence. They wouldn't be likely to be guilty of negligence. You can make a couple of arguments that kind of say, if this and if that, the result might have been slightly different. So the first part is quite simply, is there negligence? The second part is, okay, what defenses could the defendant potentially use? Okay, the defendant's in trouble. He or she is kind of staring down the barrel of a negligence lawsuit. What negligence could what defenses could they potentially share that might get them out of the problem? So that's the type of stuff we're looking for. So it doesn't need to be, particularly in the contract and tort areas, doesn't need to be black and white. You can put some area of gray into it. I welcome area of gray going into it. Lean towards a yes or a no. Certainly one thing to definitely not do, which I've seen in the past, is to argue. I've seen people kind of argue one direction and they say, definitely no contract, definitely no contract. And then their last line is, and therefore I view that there is a valid contract. So unless it's a typo and they meant to put the word not or something in there, my reaction is I'm completely confused when I read that. Okay. So do explain why you think there's a contract. Don't suddenly kind of say, yeah, there's a contract, or there's no contract. Do explain why you think there is. Refer back to previous cases, refer to the notes, refer to acts that would say, based on this act, this would not be allowed or would be allowed or whatever it is. Okay. So I've done most of the talking for the last hour. I'll go quiet, and if you guys have any final questions, you can shout them out. And if not, if they come to you later, I am around by email for the next 2 weeks, and I'll be happy to reply to them.
Yeah, just one thing I'll jump in. But I know this is relevant to all exams, but particularly for the law exam. You're saying there's 3 long questions to be completed, yeah?
No, it's in the law one. It's 2.
2, okay.
There's 4. There's 4 there. You can leave 2 alone, and you do 2 more. Yeah,
that's grand. So for that, just get your time management right. So if you have an hour to do the 2 long questions, that's 30 minutes each. And sometimes, and particularly if you get on a roll or you find something that and like half an hour is such a short period of time when you're, sitting and writing. So, and then you find, oh my God, 50 minutes have gone and I've only done question 1 and now you're rushing to do question 2. So, if you have an hour to do the 2 long questions, set an alarm on your phone for half an hour. And when the half an hour is up, stop even mid-sentence, because you've got most of the marks at this stage. Move on and do question 2, and then if you have time, go back and finish them off. Is that okay? So, one of the big mistakes people make is to get their time management wrong. And like if you spend an hour doing one question, no matter how good your answer is, you're only going to get half the marks. So just manage your time. And that applies to all the exams, but particularly to law, because you can get on a roll, and particularly there's so many different variables, and hopefully it explains why the law is so complex. You reminded me of an old friend of mine. He asked me one day, he said, Declan, I'm looking for a one-armed solicitor. And I said, why, Liam? And he said, well, he said, every time I talk to these fellas and pay them a fortune, I ask them a straight question and say, well, on one hand it's this, and on the other hand it's that. I just want a one-armed solicitor. So I think we've enough appreciation now to know it doesn't really work that way. And the fact that half the cases that ever are brought are lost, says how complex it is in the real world. But maybe this course will give you some of the questions and an understanding into how it works. But for the exam, time management is it. Get your short questions in as quickly as you can to give yourself as much time. Then half the time, set your alarm, stop, move on to the next question, and then stop, and then maximize the number of marks you can get. So that's my tuppence worth for what it's worth, and hopefully that will help on the day. If there's nothing else, guys, it's still a lovely sunny day where I am, and hopefully it is where you are. So go and enjoy it. Throw the books away for the rest of the day. Enjoy the sunshine while we have it. And you have 2 weeks now to get ready for the exam. And the very best of luck to all of you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Amanda.
And thanks, Paul. Yeah, well done. Yeah,
You're welcome.
covered
Thank you
everything.
very much. Well, all the best.
See you all. Take care. Bye bye. I'll just
Talk to
stop
you soon,
the recording
guys.
now.
Take care.